Welcome to Hey Sister. This is episode 36, Babysitters Club.
Hey, sister.
Hey, sister.
Join me, Courtney Lewis,
and me, Carly Ferguson,
in our conversational podcast about everyday situations.
You can count on us to tell it to you straight with our own sisterly spin.
Consider this a phone call with your own Southern sisters as we discuss with you personal accountability, healthy relationships, managing responsibilities, and contributing to society.
Each episode will consist of straight talk and a call to action.
Your sisters are calling.
Thanks for answering.
Hello and welcome to Hey Sister. This is Carly, and we're so glad y'all are answering our sisterly call this week. This month and next, our theme is Summer Hot Topics, as Courtney and I have real conversations about topics we are passionate about. These topics are ones we seem to circle back to in our regular phone calls.
One topic we've been discussing recently is babysitting. So we're going to talk about that today and the differences that we've observed since we were babysitters years ago, as well as rates and expectations. And we're going to do it in a little bit of a cheesy style: who, what, where, when, why, and wow. So we're going to cover some of those topics today, all those things as they relate to babysitters. But before we jump into today's episode, just a couple of reminders. We always have show notes with every episode, so be sure to check those so that you can find links to our social media accounts on Instagram and Facebook, as well as any other episodes or resources that we might refer to in this episode. We'll also include the call to action this week that we'll be issuing today, and there's a minute marker timeline, so you can jump back in if you lose your place, or if you want to look ahead to see where our tangents lead if we get derailed. Now, all that said, let's have some fun. So Carly, do you remember back when we were kids, there was one particular Christmas morning where you received a child's violin?
Mm-hmm.
You remember that? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember how I felt about that violin that you got?
I don't remember what you felt about it. I was sure excited about it.
Were you?
Yeah, I was. And coming down the stairs, it was always really funny because Santa had left piles of things. And it was for us to, by process of elimination sometimes, or just seeing something that seemed like it would be something for ourselves, then that was how we gravitated towards one particular pile.
You could tell because it would have clothing in your size or shoes of your size, maybe a new tennis racket. If you played tennis, you would know what pile belonged to who, like you said, by process of elimination.
And was this one year that you started gravitating towards my pile upon seeing the violin?
Exactly.
And maybe leaning away from another pile?
Exactly. So you received this child's violin, and I was pretty certain that your pile was my pile because Dallas's pile was pretty evident. He was the only boy, and Cassidy's pile at the time was like full of baby toys. So it was obviously not mine, but I really wanted your pile because when I looked over at the pile across from it, it was a whole collection of books. And I was like, oh, joy. Books like that can't possibly be for me. Carly loves to read. These have to be for her. I was not a reader. And I will attribute that to the fact that I am legally blind in one of my eyes. So I just never really enjoyed reading.
And I never put that together until you said that recently. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because I was always like, you didn't finish the Harry Potter books?
I know. That is a trait. I want my kids to love reading, but I've never really loved reading. And it was something that I didn't put together that it had to do with my vision until as an adult, I saw my eye doctor. Shout out Dr. Bodley. I do love you. I feel like I never put together that I didn't like reading because of my eyesight, because it was hard and it was strained my brain. So anyway, I had this whole pile of books, and they weren't just any books. It was the Babysitter Club series. Do you remember those books?
Yeah.
So I didn't read them, but I did receive all of them. I had the whole series. And I did not want them. I wanted your pile. I would rather have learned the violin than have read all those books. I looked at that book series and I was probably 14 years old. And I just thought, absolutely not. That is not the pile I want. I want the 10-year-old pile of the child's violin. I just was so sad. I did not want those books. Anyway, I think despite the fact that I didn't love reading, I loved babysitting. And you loved babysitting too, right?
Yeah, I did.
I feel like I learned a lot of life lessons from babysitting. As the oldest kid in our family, I got to babysit my younger siblings a lot. And I loved that. I love being in charge of you guys. It's still my favorite thing to do. But I loved going over to other people's households to learn about their families. I loved feeling like I could play with little kids. I felt like it actually set me up really well for motherhood.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like we were the girls in church that would go and take a baby from someone else exactly, but we liked little kids and it was just that responsibility we seemed to enjoy actually.
Right. So today, Carly and I want to talk a little bit about our experiences when we were kids babysitting, but that has been at this point for me decades ago, plural decades. Carly is not, you're like 15 years or so away from your babysitting days. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about our memories. She's trying to calculate and do the math. I wish you could see her face, sister. She's
I'm 4 years younger than you. I'm not like a decade or anything.
So we want to reflect back on our memories from babysitting, but also we want to go through some of, like I said, the 5 W's of babysitting. And we're going to talk about who to look for a babysitter, what they should know, what they should expect, what to pay, where you can use your babysitters, when to invite a babysitter, and why, because it keeps us sane. We won't have to spend too long on why.
Makes the world go around.
Right. And the wows of babysitter, little things that babysitters have done over the years that have really impressed us. So Carly, with that said, who are you looking for when you go to find a babysitter?
So we have 3 little boys, like looking for a girl we know. It could also be a boy that we feel like matches the energy of our kids because our kids are very energetic and they're all young. It needs to be somebody who has enough energy to play with them the whole time and also has enough responsibility that they can corral them. So those are general traits, but we are excited to be able to have some teenage boys that we feel really confident with, also babysit them because they can just bond with them in a different way. And so we've looked for babysitters that are energetic and responsible.
I love those points. I think for us, we've had a male babysitter once or twice, and it worked out really perfect for us at the time because this particular boy that we used, at least one of the boys that comes to mind, had been a swim instructor for my kids. And it was perfect because he had taught my kids swimming lessons and then to say, hey, come on over for a couple hours during the day. It was a perfect fit. And it was during the day. So the boy didn't have to worry about bedtime. And my kids loved it because it was just playing for 2 straight hours during waking hours. So it was great. But I do typically tend to go with girls, especially with having younger kids that are in diapers. I feel like I'm looking for usually an oldest sister in a family. Okay, not oldest sister. That's me plugging for myself.
That's the thing. I think we look for ourselves as as teenagers. If we could hire our younger selves to babysit our kids, we totally would, right? Because we really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. So we look for qualities like that.
Does that make us sound a little vain? Maybe, but we were really good babysitters. We never fell asleep on the job, and we always brought tickets to motivate the kids to do things or new games to try and play. Or
I mean, I was there and I was with them. I don't know how much I was over the top on certain ones, but
I was a little crazy. I was a little extra. I brought like a babysitting bag. I was always going nuts. And the other day we had a babysitter and she totally came with a babysitting bag and a game for the kids to play. And I was like, oh, I found you.
I'm like, all you have to do is just play with them. You don't have to bring anything. You don't have to clean up, but we can get to that. It's
okay,
fine.
Cool. Well, those are some who, it can be a girl or a boy. Don't be stuck thinking that it has to be a 16-year-old girl.
Or a 20-year-old.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And there are ways. So I think we should also put a plug for care.com. Or if you need to find somebody and you're in an area you don't know anyone, you can use that. The prices are listed. You can put how often you need someone. And if you're in an area that has maybe a university, you'll often find a lot of students who are on there who would love to babysit and are really good candidates for babysitting. So there is always that. But I think a part of the who is where do you find them,
Right.
Yeah.
So in fact, why don't we make that part of the where? So if we say who you're looking for, girls or boys, could be students.
Where do you find them?
Where do you find them? And I like that you mentioned care.com. I think another place to find them, even so far, we've already mentioned church. I've used a lot of kids from our church congregation to babysit. And that does give me a huge sense of peace, knowing that I know their families. Another way to find people that you feel like you know their families is within your neighborhood. I've used 2 sitters that are next door neighbors of mine. And that has been a really great place to find a babysitter because they live right next door. Also makes it really easy for me on the driving them home part, or on them not having to use their hard-earned gas money to get to my house. So that's been great.
I have asked a friend of mine who is in a neighborhood for her babysitters because we're not in a neighborhood. So I asked her if she would be willing to share some of those. And so that's how I got one of our babysitters that we love. And she's close by, but she's not actually directly around us.
Right. And One last place I'll say that I've looked that's been helpful is my kid's preschool teacher. She had a teenage daughter. And when she told me that her daughter babysat, I was like, yes, thank you. And also plug out there, if you are a mother of a teenage daughter, please let other people around you know that your daughter wants to babysit and that you're supportive of that, because that actually helps me a lot. Just the other day, I had a mom say, well, she wished she was babysitting more. I was certain to turn to that mom and be like, hey, could she babysit this weekend? Because I knew that she was looking for it. And if you're a teenage girl, you're not going to look like you've got your hand out looking for freebies if you're asking to babysit. I am so grateful when a teenage girl tells me. In fact, the other day I had a girl tell me, if you ever need a babysitter and everybody else has said no, would you call me? I was like, absolutely, but I'm not going to call you.
That's so sweet. Like, I may not be your first pick, but I can be your last.
She was so cute. And she's 13 years old. And when she came over, she was adorable. She didn't have a cell phone. So we did have to make some accommodations of leaving her with my cell phone. And then we took my husband's cell phone to go out. That way, if there was an emergency, she could call. But I feel like that's part of this whole process, is learning with whoever you have. So whoever you find, wherever you find them, you might have to make some accommodations along the way. Like Carly said, if you go through care.com, you might find some 20-year-old college student, which is fantastic. They can transport themselves. Whereas for my husband and I, we mix it up. We've had probably a dozen or more different babysitters in our house over the last couple of years. And we just like to change it up. We have one or two that we consistently use for the most part, that she is old enough to drive. And we love it when she can drive to our house. And that's fantastic. But that's a little bit of the who and the where. Now, I do want to add for where do you use a babysitter? Be creative and think outside the box. We often have babysitters at our house, but there have been times where I needed a babysitter while I did an appointment, and my appointment was right across the street from a park. And so I brought the babysitter with me and I said, would you play at this park for an hour while I do my appointment? It was perfect. I just picked a babysitter on the way and they played for an hour. It was awesome and easy. So it's okay to think outside the box. You don't have to have the babysitter at your house.
Yeah. Just try to be thinking ahead of like how your kids will behave in that area. And if it's within the scope of that babysitter.
Right.
Because for me, like I probably wouldn't leave a babysitter or someone who was maybe in their teenage years at a park, because I've got a very different situation of like little kids that might go in different directions. And so I think it's just knowing your age and stage of kids and where they would do well. But
right. It's
fun for them, right? To be able to go to a park and be with somebody that they know and have a great time. They won't even know you're gone, which is great.
Yeah, it was really nice because for my kids, they were old enough. I had one in an infant carrier. So that kid stayed buckled into his car seat the entire time. And then I brought a soccer ball for my older kids and they just played soccer the whole time. So they loved that. But yeah, like you said, consider your kids' needs and where they will thrive. But it's okay to also think outside the box. I actually recently asked another mom, I said, can I just pick up your daughter to be a mother's helper for me? Because I have to run into a store to pick up some photos and I don't want to bring all my kids. So for $5, I borrowed a kid for 30 minutes just to sit in the car while I ran in. And it took me 5 minutes going in and out of the grocery store, but to have somebody else in the car, that was worth it for me.
Oh, that's such a good idea.
And I just called her on the way. I was like, hey, I'm driving by. Are you home? And she said, yeah. And I said, can I borrow your daughter? And it's summer. So it was perfect.
Right. I know that's what I was going to say is summer is a great time for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So those are a little bit about who and where. Oh, let's talk about what to pay a babysitter. This is one of those topics.
Big one.
Yeah. And this is one of those topics that I feel like can be a little bit, speaking of the hot topics, right? In fact, the other day, my husband mentioned to people that he works with, they were talking about date nights or activities. And somebody brought up, well, how much do you pay your sitters? And somebody else answered the question first that they paid $25 an hour. And my husband's jaw dropped because he's like, wait, 25? Are you kidding me? And they said, well, how much do you pay? Knowing, by the way, that we have more kids by 400% than any of them. Because like we have 4 kids and most of my husband's coworkers have 1, maybe 2 kids. And so when my husband said, I think we pay $15 an hour because he doesn't ever pay the babysitter. It's me who's paying. I'm the one who carries the cash. I mean, he goes to work, but I carry the cash. Yeah. Anyway, so
in cash.
Yeah, in cash. I like to pay in cash, not Venmo, because our sitters are young enough.
I was thinking your son. I was like,
oh no, yeah, I don't pay with my son. That's true. His name is also Cash. So when he said that, their jaws dropped. They were like, "You are so cheap. You've got to pay your babysitters more." And it was interesting because when he came home and told me that, I was like, "Honey, our babysitter always comes back. She's never declined us. She's happy here." And our kids go to bed at 8 and we don't get home till 10. So they have, at least if we're gone for 4 hours, 2 of the hours are them enjoying just a couple hours relaxing. They can fall asleep on the couch. Like we've told them, feel comfortable to watch our TV. You know, if they have a phone, they can surf the net.
Did you just say the net? Did you just say that? Oh, that's great.
Sorry, I know. Speaking of my decades ago when I used to babysit, they can surf the net. I didn't have a cell phone, one of those cool contraptions.
Well, that's a thing too. I remember at the end of the night, not even knowing how to do the TV. Like people I was babysitting, they'd have like some nice TV and it was like remotes and I didn't even know how to do it. So I just sit there,
right,
like waiting.
Twiddling your thumbs. I remember doing sit-ups until people would get home. Like, I guess I'll just work out, but in their house.
That's unique.
I don't know. I do wall sits. I was weird. It's fine. But anyway, my husband was like, well, we need to pay our babysitters more. I'm like, as long as they're not turning down jobs, then I guess they're happy with the pay. So I would say anywhere from 10 to 20 is an acceptable range. I looked up online to see what average rates were across the nation. And in our state in Arizona, the average rate was between $14 and $15 an hour. And then in Texas, the rate was $15 an hour there. This calculation was down to pennies. So it was like 1476 or 1498. It was like very specific and done by calculations. And that's where Carly would be like, my husband would wonder where this data was collected from.
I know. Where does that data come from?
Yes.
Most
Okay.
of it's probably not reported. So
it's Wikipedia. Okay, Carly, it's the truest source of information. Okay. Anyway, so I would say, I feel like that's kind of your range. You will know that you're paying too little if people turn down your jobs.
yeah, as long as they're not bitter and they keep saying yes, then that's great. But always think about how hard your kids really are. Don't be too like, oh, my kids are so much fun. Be like, no, I've got 3 kids who can be demanding, require a lot of attention. And so I should think about what each kid would also cost. So we usually do $15 an hour, but I just make it like a round number. So if it falls a little closer to like $40, I might just say 40. If it goes closer to 50, I'll go up to 50. But also I love that my babysitter that we use more often now has Venmo. So that just makes everything really nice. I can just Venmo her.
That's your love language.
It really, it truly is. I'm like, you mean I don't have to have cash? Icing on the cake.
Yeah, that's awesome. My babysitters don't use Venmo, and we usually have to use 15 minutes of our date to stop by the bank to get cash. But I think that's awfully generous of you to round up from 15. I feel like ours is 15 after we've rounded up to the nearest round dollar amount, because probably 12 to 15 is what we pay. It's usually anywhere from that range that goes up to like 15 an hour, but we also use our babysitters often. So I feel like because we have a lot of date nights, frequency means I'm not going to go spending $20 or $25 an hour if we're going out, but because we make it more frequent, my babysitters get used more. So they seem happy with it. But yeah, I think that's also another consideration to have. Yes. Like, be honest. Are they difficult children? Are they awake the whole time? How hard is bedtime? And also, how often are you using the babysitter? Because if you're using them infrequently, you might want to pay more. So that way they know to make time for you if it is infrequent.
Always pay more the first time. Not more, but definitely don't undercut it. Do what would be typical.
So I think we've covered some who, where, what, and let's talk a little bit about when to invite a babysitter. Carly, I really loved the other day you said that you invited your sitter to come to an event. What was that?
Yeah, we really like our babysitter. And so we invited her to Rush's 4th birthday, and she said she could come. And so when she came, she was like, hey, what can I help with? And I was able to have her help my mother-in-law put together the happy birthday sign, with those foil balloons that you have to individually blow up and connect together. So it's no small feat. So I was really grateful that she came early a little bit and was there to help with the event. And it meant a lot to Rush, my oldest, to see her there. And I think that's kind of how it goes. The ones that are able to create those bonds or remember names will appreciate more opportunities to see them, not even just in a babysitting situation. So it was really nice of her to come and do that. They've enjoyed seeing her there and then when babysitting.
I love that. I haven't had a babysitter come to our birthday parties, but we do try and visit our babysitters' houses when it's like Halloween, for example.
That's cute.
Especially the neighbors that are babysitters. Like, that's an easy one. We haven't ventured outside of our neighborhood to go, but it makes it convenient.
I think it goes the other way too. If they're involved in things, It would be like a really fun thing as a family to be like, hey, you are in band. Can we come to the football game and say good job to you and see you on the field? That'd be really fun for you as a family. It goes back to the episode with Beth Ann Sands in talking about how we can support the youth and really appreciate them for these amazing qualities that they have that make them great babysitters, that we want our kids to see them as a role model and someone that they can aspire to be more like. So opportunities to go the other direction and go see them at stuff would be cool too.
That is a great idea. So I think we've talked a little bit about every W question, who, what, where, when. We mentioned why at the beginning for our sanity. Now let's talk about the how, because I think it's important for us to remember on our end. We've talked a little about what we're looking for in a babysitter, but how do you orchestrate getting a babysitter? Something I'm passionate about is that if your babysitter is under 16 and isn't driving, please have the wife go pick up the babysitter. I think that seems common sense, but I do remember as a youth having the husband of a couple drive me home. And for some reason, they did it that way every time when I would babysit for them. And I remember every time sitting quietly in that car and just feeling so awkward for 10 minutes. And so I really strive to make it my effort when I drive the babysitters home to get to know them. So like Carley mentioned in episode 32 with Beth Ann Sands, It Takes a Village, when we have an opportunity to be around youth, hype them up. So I love when I'm driving youth home to use that as an opportunity to talk about them, because it is the natural instinct to be like, so tell me more about my kids when you were babysitting. And this is not the time for you to seek validation in your parenting skills. This is the time when you're dropping a babysitter off to ask about what sports they're in, to see, like Carley's saying, if you can go support them in an event. I would say use that time wisely. And another how is to consider when you're leaving your babysitter, are you equipping them with all the information that they need to know?
Yeah. And you said you had a like a template or like a form. Is that what you've used before?
Right. It was a fantastic baby shower gift years ago. My dear friend, I call her sometimes my second mom, Tammy. So Tammy gave me a babysitting, like a ripoff. What's it called? A pad. She gave me a pad that was like, where will be emergency contact information. It was just a pad of paper, but it had pads that you could rip off. And we've actually gone through, it's taken us 7 years of enough date nights to rip through all those papers. So I need to go find another one of those pads, but it was so creative because it basically just had all the important information. So you could write down your cell phone number. Now I just write on boring pieces of paper where we'll be and how long we'll be gone, and just a reminder of the bedtime. I think you've actually mentioned this the other day, Carley, write your address down in case there is an emergency and your babysitter needs to call 911, heaven forbid, you would want them to be able to say, this is the address.
Right.
So always tell your babysitter where you'll be and where they are. Let them know your physical address.
I would think to say a local neighbor, one neighbor that you would trust them to go to their door. If they needed to go, say, like 2 doors down, the house with some distinctive feature, the so-and-sos, if you should need something, just like head over there too. Like we usually go in a group text, my husband and I and the babysitter. So that way we're all in the same message all the time and can add to that. Even when we ask them to babysit, it's just all within the same message.
That's smart. I like that. Another thing that I saw that used to be on my pad that I need to remember to write out is house rules. That would include kids' health as well. If there's something that kids can't eat, like your son has allergies, that would be a good place to write down. Obviously, like say it out loud, but also have it written down. Also house rules, like at my house, we are not allowed to throw things over the banister. And that is a critical house rule. Mind you, now my kids are old enough that my oldest child will enforce that rule and make sure that the babysitter knows it. But until the last couple of years, that's been an important thing for me to let babysitters know. Like the kids know you can't throw anything over the banister. If you have a rule that they can't jump on the beds. Carley, you and I used to see this when we would babysit. Kids love to tell their babysitters, oh no, I'm allowed to stay up later. Or, oh no, I'm allowed to eat this. And so make sure that if there is a certain house rule that is expressed to your babysitter, and that's the beauty of using a babysitter more than once, they kind of get into the rhythm. Also a good idea, if you've got younger kids who can't talk, to let the babysitter know what your kids' names are. Because wouldn't it be stinky if your babysitter's new and it's like, what was the 1-year-old's name again? You want them to be able to talk to your kids. So it's helpful to write it down. Any reminders? This is important because Carley mentioned to me the other day how important it is to let somebody know if you're expecting anybody or not. So that's an important thing. That way the babysitter knows, don't open the door. We're not expecting anybody. If a package comes, just let it sit there. Whereas if you are expecting a package while you're gone, if you're getting a notification on your phone, you can let them know if the doorbell rings, there's an Amazon package that's arriving. Just let them know. That way they're not afraid. Like I would have been terrified if the doorbell rang when I was a kid. I don't handle those kind of situations well. If something unexpected happens, let the babysitter know if you're expecting anybody. Obviously, let the babysitter know when you'll be home. And those would be like really the house. Now we've gone through those who, what, where, when, why, how, and let's talk about some wow moments that our babysitters have really wowed us with and what sets a babysitter apart for you, Carly. Anything?
Typically, because I want my kids to really connect with them. The first time, I really want them to just take it easy. I'm okay with them even watching TV together on the first, but I know a lot of parents who say absolutely no TV, like we're paying you. We're not going to have you sitting there and watching TV. But I'd rather them not. And I tell them that I want them to play. But I also know my kids might bond better if, they're going to watch a show and they're going to be sitting there with them. Just like we would need a little bit more time to adjust. Maybe that would be good for them in that first occasion. So I try to be very just like, I don't have a ton of expectations the first time, but I want them to wow me. But I'm not going to say like the house has to be clean, do the dishes. I just want to see how they interact with my kids first and foremost, and trying to give them as much room to do what they can to make them happy. Because I mean, my kids are energetic. They're going to not want to watch TV and they're going to want to play and stuff. So I want to see how they handle that. But I also know it might come the second time and they feel a little bit more comfortable with it. I think I'm wowed when our babysitter, they made out of boxes, a little fort, and we're like playing with it, but I don't expect them to bring things with them. I also don't expect them to have the house clean. I want them to just play. And I remember you saying that I want my babysitter to be liked. So yeah, they can have something special when the babysitter comes over, then that's totally fine. So that's kind of how I go, is when the babysitter comes over, it's something special. And so the kids are kind of excited about that.
It is a wonderful thing. I feel like you hit this threshold where, whoa, having a babysitter is now easy and fun. And the kids are excited about it. The first several times my husband and I tried to get a babysitter, I remember thinking, this is torture. The kids are crying when we're leaving. I'm telling the babysitter, do whatever it takes. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I'm leaving you with a crying child. I think it'll stop within the next 5 to 15 minutes, but text me if it's not and we'll come home sooner. Like, I don't want my kids crying for 30, 45 minutes. And we have come home before because it was just an hour of hearing that the kids were having a hard time. And I was like, we're not going to force this. But that was when the kids were younger and now they're excited about it. But like you said, I'm one who prefers to not have the TV on because my kids get enough TV during the day and I try to monitor who gets to watch which shows. So each kid has a number of shows they're allowed to watch. So I don't want to have that rhythm thrown off by the babysitter. I'd rather them not fight over that.
And I guess for me to qualify that, because I have looked at these qualities, like we talked about in the Who, I think they're energetic and I think they're responsible. And because of that, I want to give them a sense of autonomy that they can choose. I'm not going to be really strict on what to do and what not to do.
Right.
Because I want to just trust that they will try their best to have them be happy. And that's kind of the goal. It's not as much about rules for me at this point. I'm wanting them to have a good time with the kids. And I trust them in how they would do that. And so keeping it clean, even if there's some TV, it's fine because I know that it'll like balance out.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, keeping it clean, but within reason too. We don't want to come home to a completely trashed house that they made forts and left everything crazy. So I love it when a babysitter has fun and like maybe puts away some of the mess that was made. I do not expect my house to be clean. I want the kids to have had such an awesome time with the babysitter. And I don't mind if there's evidence of that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to clean my game room once a week regardless. And it doesn't matter what the state is, but I love when I get home and I see that there's coloring sheets that are out. The kids have been coloring with them. I'm like, oh, great. Thank you for thinking to do something creative.
Yeah.
And to be there and physically making sure they didn't color on the walls and that you colored a picture too. I am so wowed by babysitters that do a craft with the kids. Even if it's just coloring a picture, I consider that a craft. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is great that you would take the time to do that. I'm wowed by sitters that can drive themselves.
Yes.
Man, that is an investment too. Like, I feel like there's this sweet spot. Last week, you talked about social sweet spots. I feel like there's like babysitter sweet spots. You want to find a babysitter that's like 14 or 15 that probably doesn't have a whole lot of extracurricular activities they're involved in. And so you're willing to pick them up for a year, but then they hit 16 and you're like, hey, you want to babysit every weekend? This is great. Now you can drive.
Yeah.
Unless they're like me when I was 16 and I didn't get my license till I was 18 because I was afraid of driving.
How did you babysit?
They would pick me up until I was like, I think I was 17, almost 18 when I got my license. I'm sure that those parents were very upset by the fact that I was not driving, but I was a great babysitter, but they did have to pick me up. Now that I think about that, that's kind of embarrassing, but
I mean, I'm sure they loved you as a babysitter. You brought your own bag.
I did have my babysitter bag.
It was worth it.
I know I may not have read the Babysitter Club books, but I was a good babysitter. But yeah, I just have to say we are very grateful for our babysitters and they keep us sane in our relationships. It's very important to have date nights. And so utilize those babysitters. And I think that's a pretty self-explanatory call to action, right?
Yeah.
Get a babysitter, book a babysitter.
And when you're on your date, you're doing whatever you're doing during that babysitter time, enjoy it. That's the beauty of a babysitter is just have fun. Don't be checking in on the babysitter all the time. If they need you, they'll reach out to you. Okay. And just let yourself be present away from the kids.
Yes.
That's the beauty of it. That's the value.
Do you remember that 15, 20 years ago when we were the babysitters, there was a home landline. And if you needed to reach the parent, you would have to call them on their cell phone because adults at that point had cell phones, but a lot of kids didn't have cell phones.
Yeah.
So you would have to get the home line to call. And if they wanted to check in with you, they would have to call a landline. So people have gone for decades, even centuries, without having a phone call connection to the babysitter at home. You don't need to have every update on how the kids ate their dinner or how are they doing right now. It's okay to unplug and not text and check in with babysitter how things are going. Because that's how it's been done for decades.
Right.
Don't feel bad if you're not checking in to see how the kids are doing.
Set them up for success. See them at the end.
Yeah. So in conclusion, book yourself a babysitter, sisters, and let us know what you're doing with your babysitter. What kind of fun things you're doing. We'd love to hear from you online. Check in on our roll call post on Instagram at the Hey Sister Podcast. We're going to check in with y'all this week to see if you booked your sitter. We'd love to hear what you were doing that was fun or necessary in your life and enjoy that time with a babysitter. Thanks so much for joining our call this week, as always, and have a wonderful week, sisters. We will talk to y'all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're going to check in with y'all this week to see if you booked your sister. So booked your sitter.
Could have called it Hey Sitters.
Hey sitters. So in conclusion, book yourself a babysitter, sisters. Wow, that's hard to say. Babysitter sisters.
These topics are ones we seem to circle back to in our regular phone calls. I said regular. I don't know why I said that.